What's up, guys? Welcome back to Chris's Habs Corner. So today we're going to be going over Christian Dvorak on the trade block, possibly, and we're going to be going over what we're going to do with this 31st pick overall. Is Kent Hughes trying to move up with that pick before Wednesday the 28th or on draft day in Nashville? So before we get right into it, I'd appreciate it if you could like this video and give it a subscribe. It would really help me out and grow on the channel. So let's get right into it. So as we know, Sean Monahan signing that deal last week. 1 year. Close to $2 million. We are having an overabundance at center position, obviously, and right now on roster, obviously we have Nick Suzuki, Kirby Dach, Sean Monahan, Christian Dvorak, Jake Evans, trying to get PLD, having guys like Owen Beck coming up as prospects pretty soon. We are going to have an overflow at the center position. So is Christian Dvorak possibly on the move? I believe, one of the biggest rumors that we've heard is that he is going to be packaged, at least try to be packaged with the 31st overall pick to possibly be moved to Winnipeg in exchange for PLD. I just hope Kent Hughes is smart about the movements with Christian Dvorak because one of the reasons why I don't necessarily think that that's such a smooth move to exchange him to Winnipeg is basically I don't want Kirby Dach's positioning at center to be jeopardized, right? I really think it's important that this next season Kirby Dach stays at center, and bringing PLD, Pierre-Luc Dubois, back into this lineup would potentially put that into jeopardy. Yes, you could put Monahan on the wing, but the big thing is that if PLD comes here, he's going to be top six. He's not playing bottom three, third line, fourth line minutes. He's going to be a second line center. Where does that put Kirby Dach, right? Suzuki, Dach, and then you have, Suzuki, Dubois, and then you have Kirby Dach there. Everybody's argument for that is to put him on the wing, and I don't really think that's such a great idea. I think we really saw Kirby Dach's game take off when he was at center last season, centering his own line. There was a big chunk of the season where he was playing wing with Caulfield and Suzuki, but then right before he got hurt and missed a chunk of time, he was at that center position playing arguably the best hockey of his career. He was really tapping into not only using his fluidity along the boards, in the offensive zone to win pucks, but he was using his body and his frame to gain inside positioning, to really just take command and control over the offensive zone with his body and his frame, and just how smooth his movements were along the boards. I just saw him collectively in the offensive zone just take so much more control of the game when he was centering his own line. As well as supporting a lot better in all three zones. He was supporting down low his defense in the defensive zone. And I think Kirby Dach really is the type of player that engages himself and understands his highest potentials when he's at the center position, which is what his natural position is. And I just think there's much more untapped, undiscovered potential elements to his creativity, to his IQ, and to his playmaking abilities in the offensive zone. As a center, and I think at least for the next season he needs to stay there, right? Sure, you could bump him up, on the power play, of course, playing the wing. You could put him with Caulfield, Suzuki in a pinch. But I think he needs, at this point in his career and how young his career is, I think he needs to keep continuing to develop as a centerman. So I don't necessarily like the movement of putting Dvorak with the 31st pick in exchange for PLD. My thought on that is to wait. Yes, I know, the Los Angeles Kings are in contention for him, and they're going to try to sign him, lock him up for a long-term deal. But if PLD really wants to come here, I think he would easily wait it out another season and then come along. Is at least then Kirby Dach has that full NHL season as a centerman under his belt, right? Because let me tell you from firsthand experience, going from wing to center is a lot harder than going from center to wing, right? It's not easy to play a position where you're involved in every second of every single push shift on the ice, converting from playing the wing where you're kind of stationary in a lot of moments, right? And so Kirby Dach could always have that to fall back on, going back to playing center when needed. if he develops for a solid season at center, and I think he still needs that. Um, so I don't necessarily know if moving Dvorak to Winnipeg would be such a great idea in the first place, but maybe you could potentially package him in with the 31st to try to move down in the draft, or move up in the first round, excuse me. That's my thoughts on that. Let's get into a little bit of what exactly my thoughts are on the 31st pick and where it's going to be moved in the first round, because I do think it's more likely that the 31st pick overall is going to be moved by Kent Hughes before draft day, more so than the 5th pick, right? Um, and just really quick, my thoughts on the 5th pick are this is such a loaded draft, especially the first 5. We're never going to see this rich of talent in this intense of a talented pool of players within the first 5, even 10 players in this draft for another probably for a long time. And I just don't think you should move the 5th pick up or down in general. I've heard and I've seen so many different trade proposals with the 5th pick to move down, to move up. I've even talked about moving up in my previous episode that I had. Um, My thoughts are if Michkov's there, take him. If they really don't want to take him, Benson or Leonard. If you haven't seen any type of prospect scouting videos on Benson or Leonard on multiple different YouTube channels, on multiple different blogs, I encourage you highly to check them out. They are, in any other draft year, top 5 picks. Okay? They are players that are going to dynamically change your offense. And it is a victory if you take Benson or Leonard. Okay? So that's my thoughts on that. But let's get into the 31st. And one guy that we've all been talking about trade speculation now for a chunk of the offseason is Joel Edmondson, right? $3.5 million, 1 year left on his deal, and until 2024 he's a UFA. Obviously the Habs tried to move him at the trade deadline. His injury really hindered that. He would have been moved at the deadline last year if it wasn't for that back injury that he had, and just general managers around the league just didn't trust in his injury. And you could really see the last chunk of the season how he really just wasn't the same player because of that injury. It's almost like he didn't trust himself, especially in the defensive zone, in his game because of his injury, right? He didn't trust himself. When he had the puck, it seemed like he panicked. It seemed like he just wasn't getting the good body positioning that we're used to seeing from him on players defensively in his own zone. He just didn't feel like he was fully 100% in tune with his instincts defensively because of that injury. So, one argument is that he probably would have more trade value next season when, you could prove that he's back to 100% playing like himself. And another argument is that right this time of year, there's a lot of teams desperate to be making moves, and players' values are inflated a little bit, so this card could potentially be the best time to move him. So I'm on the latter half of that. I think this is a good time to try to move him right now, especially the teams that really need some type of defenseman that's rugged, that really just knows how to shut down players and just draws players in one-on-one and just smothers plays along the boards, like the true 100% effective Joel Edmondson really is. Guy that can clear out the front of the net, box out really well, and just suck players into him, staying one-on-one and just take away their time and space and completely kill plays along the boards. And just make the responsible reads and just make decent, good outlets out of your zone. That's the Joel Edmondson we know. And I think there's a lot of teams that would be, or a few teams at least, that would be hungry for him now. But could we move him along with the 31st pick, to move up in the draft? I think so. One potential possibility that I'm going to go over. I'm going to go over a few possibilities of different rumors I've heard with Joel Edmondson named involved with the 31st pick that could potentially be moved before Wednesday. That I've seen circulating around the internet a lot, and one of them is the deal with Washington, which is Joel Edmondson being moved there. We retain 50% along with Anderson and the 31st pick to Washington in trade for Anthony Mantha, the 8th overall pick, right? Anthony Mantha would be a salary dump to us, and he has, let's see here, what does it say on the stat sheet? $5.7 million, 1 more year in his contract. First and foremost, if you don't know Anthony Mantha, he was drafted 2013, 20th overall in the first round. He's like 6'4", 6'5". He's over 230 pounds. He's a big boy, but he's a power forward. He's similar to Josh Anderson, but he has more inside interior play to his game and more playmaking and vision, right? He knows how to drive plays more towards the middle and sees open ice to cut towards the middle a little bit more than Josh Anderson does. But the last, couple of years, from what I've read, he's kind of taken a step back and kind of lost his focus on hockey a little bit. And he's had a couple down years, and he's even admitted, I guess, publicly to the media that he's had trouble really focusing and honing in on his game. Outside factors in his life kind of affecting that. And I just wonder, if he did come here, would Martin St. Louis and the culture that we have here of taking the job serious but having fun with hockey and just bringing joy of hockey back into his life would bring his focus back into hockey and go back to the variables that made him a really effective playmaking power forward that he is, right? But reasons why I don't like that deal offer is because I think Anderson and Edmondson is too much. I think it would be either Edmondson or Anderson along with the 31st pick. And this would have to be contingent on what happens with Gurianov. Gurianov is a right wing as well, and we know the Habs are not going to do anything with his offer sheet. He is going to go to free agency, but is Kent Hughes planning on signing Gurianov again on the cheaper, more like a lot less than that $3 million that's on his offer sheet, right? And if they are offering Gurianov a contract closer to $1.5 million for a year, there's no sense in bringing Anthony Mantha into the fold, I don't think. Would he actually have legitimate playing time? That not to mention his $5.7 million cap hit for Joel Edmondson's $3.5 and we're retaining half of it. You're not totally saving an immense amount of money there either, right? Yes, it would be nice to have the 8th overall pick, which to me is far more obviously important than Mantha. Yes, it would be nice to get Reinbacher at 8th overall. I know a lot of people are saying, take Reinbacher at 5th, instead of, no. Look, Reinbacher is a solid number 1 defenseman, but he's not a top 5 pick, especially this year with how rich it is. So that is why it's imperative if we can move the 31st pick up high enough within the top 10 and Reinbacher's there, I think then you go for him, right? Obviously, he's a staple defenseman. He has good gaps. He's really good at just making good outlet passes. He's big. He's really massive. He has a wide range with his stick reach. He uses his stick intelligently. He knows how to just smother plays, kill plays along the boards. He can clear the front of the net, right? But he's also mobile enough where he's not a total offensive defenseman, but he's offensive enough where he gets himself involved a little bit here and there, and his shot gets through traffic. I think he's a staple number 2, possibly number 3 defenseman, right? And he's right-handed, which is a fill that we need. He's not the flashiest defenseman, but if he's there, obviously you take him, right? Or maybe if we do end up taking a winger like Michkov at number 5, with that 8th overall pick, you could use a guy like Oliver Dvorak. I'm sure you guys have all heard of him. He has a lot of blueprint to his defensive game where it seems like he can mold into a good, solid system and structure really well. He's a center that always supports his D-men in the zone. He's always backtracking, making the right reads defensively. But he has that playmaking and scoring ability on offense too, right? Really protects the puck well, but has a lot of flash and stick handling to his game. Has good sense to make plays. All that good stuff, right? So there's a couple picks that you could use with that number 8 overall. But, again, is Gurianov coming back? And if so, where does that leave Anthony Mantha and Edmondson and Anderson, which is the supposed ask of this trade? That's just too much for me, in my opinion. Obviously, if you can move either or and with the 31st pick, I would take it. But I don't know. Let me know what you guys think about that. And then, another big kind of rumor I've heard is a couple, two more that I've heard is one is Edmondson retaining 50%, 31st to Vancouver. Vancouver's trying to move some deadwood off of their salary roster, aka Tyler Myers. So it would be that, and in exchange, we get the cap dump of Tyler Myers in the 11th pick overall. Now, Tyler Myers' cap hit is one more year, $6 million. Okay, that's a lot of money, as well as only retaining 50% of Joel Edmondson's salary. You're not saving a whole lot of money there. And Tyler Myers, I don't know, from everything I've heard and read about him, he's a guy that's like a locker room cancer a little bit. He does bring the dramatics, and he tries to make the show all about himself. That, and he has no clue how to play defensive hockey, right? He is an offensive defenseman. He is a right-handed defenseman that we need, but he's not our defensive shutdown guy, right? Not a staple defenseman, ideally, that you want on your team, I think. Yes, the 11th pick overall is nice, but I wouldn't take this deal. I wouldn't want Tyler Myers personally on my team, really, and I think that that's just too much of a salary dump. Another rumor is possibly Pittsburgh needs a defensive defenseman, right? We know they defensively had some issues last year around their D-core, just not being good in their own defensive zone, just making too many mental and just overall structural mistakes defensively last year. And Joel Edmondson could potentially be, a fill-in guy that could really just bring a solid, stable defensive presence to that team, especially if they're still not completely giving up and they're not going into rebuild mode and they still want to make one last push. Pittsburgh, with the players that they have, adding a piece like Joel Edmondson, who has that playoff depth and experience to that team, could really help them out in the long run. So what I've read is that, there had been talks of Joel Edmondson in the 31st pick, retaining 50% of Edmondson's contract to Pittsburgh for the 14th overall, which is where Pittsburgh sits in the first round right now, is the offer. And I think that's a fair deal. I do. I would take that, giving Edmondson, only taking 50% of that, and you get the 14th overall. Guys that could potentially be drafted in the 10 to 14 range that we could possibly use and fill in. Obviously, Axel Sandin Pellikka, some people have him ranked 5 to 10, but he could still be there in that 10 to 15 range. And if Reinbacher's gone and Pellikka's still there, you take him. He's not the biggest, but he uses his body and his stick intelligently in his defensive zone. He's quick enough and he has the agility to cover gaps defensively really well. And the thing about him is that he's always trying to create new, different options, breaking the puck out and distributing the puck. He is creative with the way he breaks the puck out of his zone. He really activates up ice. He's more of an offensive defenseman than Reinbacher is, from what I've heard. And he kind of fits into this new era, new style of defenseman that we have in our roster, right? And he is a right-handed defenseman, a need that we need. So that could potentially be someone. Another one that could be in the 10 to 15 range is a guy of Gabe Perreault. I'm sure you guys have heard of him. He's really fast. He has really, really good wheels. He is a great, great playmaker. From what I've read about Gabe Perreault is that he is a player that is really good at just drawing people into him and trying to forecheck him. But he only has the puck on his stick for a couple seconds, and boom, he sees the seam of a player coming in with time and space and makes the direct pass. So he is a really, really smooth, slippery puck distributor. The centerman is Oliver Moore, supposedly one of the most explosive skaters in his draft. Really just create and just make plays happen in the offensive zone just from his explosiveness and his edge work on his skates. Which is a really, really good tangible to have to carry over into the NHL. If you don't have necessarily the IQ or the mind to see plays develop ahead of time, having that explosiveness to pop it in and out of space and just being able to cut off a pressure is a really, really heavy tool to have, and Gabe Perreault could be an option for us there. Okay, so those are some ideas of what Kent Hughes could do with the 31st pick, along with moving someone like Joel Edmondson to move up in the first round. because it is a pretty big gap to go from 5th to 31st, and it would be nice if we could move that 31st pick up higher to, like, 8th, 11th, 14th. Yes, there are some bumpy options within those big trade rumors that I just went over. Um, but if one of those could work out, preferably, honestly, the best one I think out of those three options would be the Pittsburgh deal. You know, it would be nice if he could make something happen like that. Again, Ken Hughes is a long-term visionary, right? He does not do anything for the immediate. He does things for the long term, and I do trust in him with whatever he does with the 31st pick. It would be something for the long-term plan, right? As well as what he's doing with the 5th pick. I think he just sees the long-term plan well, and I think he knows that keeping the 5th pick is probably the best option for us with the long-term rebuild that we have, right? So I don't believe he's going to do anything with that 5th pick. I think if he is going to do something, it's going to be with that 31st, and not involve the 31st with the 5th. I think he's just going to try to move the 31st with one of the players that we're trying to move on the trade block already. Another option, I don't know where or how he'd be moved, is Mike Hoffman, which is tricky. Apparently, the Habs are not trying to buy him out. They are going to try to move him for assets. Could he be potentially in the mix of being moved along with the 31st pick? Maybe you could, I don't know, if one of these teams are asking for a prospect, instead of a prospect, you could potentially move Mike Hoffman. Could you move Mike Hoffman alone instead of Joel Edmondson possibly, and a prospect that we don't need in the 31st to move down? I'm kind of curious to see if Kent Hughes is somehow going to make that happen. I mean, I kind of doubt it because there aren't a whole lot of teams that really want Mike Hoffman on their lineup. We know he doesn't necessarily show up for half the season, and there's just not a lot of needs for what the type of role he has. But that is a curious element to be brought into this draft week, right? So that's really all I have for this episode, guys. Stay tuned. I am going to be coming out with a couple more episodes before the draft. And on day, I am going to be doing my initial reaction right as soon as Kent Hughes steps down from the podium with the first pick that they use. Whatever it is, if it's 5th or if some deal goes down before that, whatever pick they use and they step away from the podium, I am going to be going on making an episode right away. So stay tuned for that as well. I'll talk to you guys pretty soon because this is a big week coming up. Go Habs, go.